in the early church, they remembered that Jesus told parables, stories that lay beside the life experience of the people and encouraged them to lift learnings from one onto the other. A biblical scholar recently suggested to me that not only did the church tell the parables of Jesus, but the church also told parables about Jesus. In other words, parables that Jesus may have not told himself, but were stories that were designed to sit beside the life experience of the community of faith and produce learnings. And this text I'm reading this morning is part of a whole bunch of texts about the end. What happens at the end? How do we live our faith? And this text, which I'm reading, was written probably during a time of great persecution to encourage the community to live the life of faith and love. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of glory, and all the nations will be gathered, and he will separate people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep at his right hand and the goats at the left. And then the king will say to those at his right hand, "Come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me." And the righteous will answer, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it we saw you sick or in prison and visited you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me."
I felt like jumping up those steps. It's so great that you came out in the polar vortex to church. And I'm so glad to stand here pretty comfortably right now. I'm about 75%, which is really good. Yesterday I was walking along and somebody said, "Which hip was it?" Which is a good sign. I want to emphasize how important it is to know that you have had great leadership in my absence. Truly amazing lay people and staff stepping in. When I sat down for a coffee with Don in September, and way back when in September, I believe, saying, "Hey, I got an idea," and he said yes. Oh, sorry. I asked Don for coffee and said I have an idea, and Don said yes to coming. I knew I was going to share not only a great friend, but a great preacher and pastor, and we're well lucky. I heard Sheena's sermon from 2 weeks ago about the spaciousness. That's a great word for Sheena. She doesn't take up space, right? She allows space to happen and steps in where she has in her leadership. She's not leaving us. She's leaving us to do some of her own work and also be among us as a pastor and friend, and I'm real glad. So I think that's what I want to say, except I'm really scared. I haven't done this for 6 months. I've been sitting in the back pew of churches all over the city, and I'll talk about that for the next 6 months. I feel like this week I stepped on an escalator that was going pretty fast, and I jolted right back in. and I'm really glad to do that. That's the nature of this 7-day-a-week community. I'm going to talk in a sermon that's a little unusual. It's going to be a bit about me, and that might be annoying for you. But I need to say some things to you that's about me, that's really about you and God. One of my mentors, and Bill mentioned him in the prayers, Garth Mundell, who you may have met here, died this past week. Garth was a person who did quantum theology with us. He served at Hillhurst United Church. And Garth was a guy I was thinking about because he's told me this. He said, the only reason I go to church is to remember who I am and whose I am. So the only reason I go is to be reminded. And so we gather today, some of you for your first time here and you're wondering what the heck's going on. Some of you are taking up the offering and you've been here only a few weeks, and I'm so glad to meet you. So we are so glad you've made space to be here. But before we do that, I want you to think about your body. And I wonder if you would take just a moment to think about, did you ever have a surgery or a fall? Wound your body in any way? And just take a minute and say, oh yeah, I had my gallstone taken out, or I fell off my bike, or whatever it is. Our bodies are such an important gift from God, and I want you to talk to somebody for 45 seconds about a time. How's your body? Did you fall? Have you ever had surgery? Go. Thank you. Thank you. I had the gift of a very wise doctor. He said, you have a hip, you aren't a hip. And that's very wise. Although it's going to be a bit hippie today. And that wasn't even a joke, but we sometimes are focused on parts of our body, and thanks for sharing a little bit with a friend. Let's pray. We are so glad it's warm in here. Some of us didn't really want to get out of bed. Somebody may have dragged us. Maybe it was you, God. Help us hear. Help us be open. Help us to love. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God. Amen. So this indeed is my first time since July 8th that I stood here, and I am a little bit scared, and I want to clarify a few things. I didn't get a new hip. I got what's called hip resurfacing. And I invite you to go to YouTube and watch it. I did that with my 8-year-old. Not a good idea. But nonetheless, I've watched it a few times. And I actually was awake for my surgery, which is really interesting too. Call me crazy. But it was a hip resurfacing. And I know some of you have had new hips, and you're like, wow, I got a new hip. That's amazing. How come he's taken so long with his? The uniqueness of our bodies, each are different, and each go through the journeys we do, and they are different. And I've been thinking about the fact that while mine was complicated, I learned lots. Isn't that the way life is? I had someone say to me that the definition of sin is the choice to stop learning. It's not smoking or drinking or whatever you want to think about. It's choosing not to learn. And so we've all had experiences, high and low, good and bad in our life. And really the ultimate question is, what'd you learn through it? Like, what did you learn when you didn't get that job you applied for? Or what did you learn when the relationship broke apart? What did you learn when someone you loved died? What did you learn when you failed? What did you learn from that book or that movie you saw recently? What did you learn? Paying attention is in part of the spiritual journey we all must be a part of. Paying attention to life. I hope my very last breath is a question. What about? And I die. That's the way I want to die. And I want to share with you something that I wrote that will maybe be printed. They've told me it will in the Globe and Mail in a few weeks, and I wanted to wait till after today. And I wrote it because I didn't want to forget. Number one. And two, I met some guy in Starbucks this week, and he looked at me and he said, "Hey, I've heard various reports about your mental abilities lately." I thought to myself, it's taken them 30 years to ask that question. That's pretty good. But seriously, I want to read something that I've written for the paper, and I invite you to daydream or snooze or be fully attentive. But it's written, and so I must read it, and I'm not a great reader, but here we go. As a minister in the United Church of Canada for 30 years, I've seen many kinds of suffering and sorrow. The tragic death of people way too young, people enduring endless chemo treatments, families struggling at the loss of a loved one to suicide, the trauma of sexual abuse or the ending of a marriage. The list goes on. All of these and more stories touch deeply at the suffering and struggle that many ordinary people face. It's a privilege, a real privilege, to be with folks in these life stories and walk with them through suffering. Life wounds each of us. Suffering's part of the deal. No one escapes. In all of these encounters, I'd never come across someone who had an addiction to opiates. Till it was me. Now, it might not be an addiction, it might be a dependence, but nonetheless, listen on. Now was my story of darkness, my own encounter with opiate dependence. Suddenly, the news stories that I heard or read had a real face and a real person, and it wasn't the stranger in the back alley who we want to say. It's actually a rich guy, privileged with a spouse and a house in a beautiful community downtown. It wasn't the stranger in the back alley, it was me, with family and friends and a job. I shook my head and smiled when my doctor said, "Any tendency of addiction?" "Nope, not me." Every time I was there, he faithfully asked. Finally, I answered, saying no, but my inside voice was going, yes, you are. It took many months to admit this and recognize the reality, not because I was embarrassed or hiding something, rather because I just didn't know. I was ignorant. I wasn't listening to my own body. I wasn't listening until my journey of withdrawal from the drugs began. So how did this happen? Innocently. Innocently, like many people who need relief from pain. Now you got to go back a year before my surgery. I was walking and limping. In fact, one day I was at the airport and I walked through the door and I couldn't move in Toronto. I had to call someone from WestJet over to get me a wheelchair to get me to my plane. My hip would not move. So after a myriad of MRIs, x-rays, physio appointments, acupuncture, I discovered that I needed a new hip. The technologist said, "You are bone on bone." I almost leapt up with joy. Thank God! It's an answer to my pain. However, a part of the pain management plan while waiting for surgery included a prescription to a powerful opiate called oxycodone. I'd never heard of oxycodone, but I wasn't aware of its destructive nature. Did you know 11 people die a day, today, 11 people in Canada on this drug? My meds began slowly, 5 milligrams a day, up to 30 milligrams, 60 a day, until the surgery a year later, or 11 months. The drug helped me to mask my pain. I felt foggy, tired, numb. Sometimes I was high as a kite. Sometimes I was depressed. Lots of the times I was slightly disoriented. After surgery was when the true trouble began, because now it was time to come off painkillers. Not so easy and not so fast. You've got to come off gradually, just like you went on them gradually. It's a journey. It was a dark journey. At sunset, I would dread the coming of the darkness. The nights brought deep darkness. My doctor said our pain is always worse at night, and he was right. He was so right. The nights are awful. I would practice deep breathing to calm myself. I would say over and over again the mantra from Scripture, peace be still, peace be still, peace be still, and it helped. One night I lay in bed and asked my wife to come in and to remove the art on the wall in front of me. The painting of a bouquet of flowers on the wall was dizzying. The faces were coming right out of the painting at me, and I was tormented. When I did sleep, my dreams or visions were terrifying. One night I met what I'll call the angel of death. It was genderless, but the invitation was clear. It was an invitation. It was wearing a brilliant green scarf over its head, and the hand outstretched was begging me forward. I wanted relief that only beckoning me forward. It beckoned me into the darkness. It was a blackness I've never seen in my life. I turned and I stepped back saying, no, not yet. I'm not ready to go. I woke up and my t-shirt was drenched wet. Now, I'm not usually a believer in such crazy dreams or visions, but the reality was way too clear to dismiss. Now I could understand why some people give up and step into the abyss. I see why some choose more drugs or will death to come as a relief from the pain of life. The ache, pain, nausea, dry mouth, body paralysis are something I had never experienced before. My days of withdrawal were focused on the clock, seconds, minutes, hours, until the next relieving dose. One night I paced my house like a criminal. I wanted to find the oxycodone. My body craved it, but it wasn't my scheduled time to take it, and somehow I resisted. I made it. Morning broke. One morning as I made my way back to bed, I've been up for an hour, I confessed to my partner, I don't want to be sick anymore. Never said that. I collapsed. My spouse, luckily, wrapped her arms around me and simply said this, I know you don't. You'll make it. You can do it. The tears of relief were so healing. Well, I met the angel of death, and I can see it. I believe in the angel of death. I also met the angels of light. Angels literally are messengers. That's what the word means. And angels come in many forms. Sometimes they came in a text message. You can do it. You're a survivor. We need you back. Or, I'm proud of you. Or sometimes the word hug. Or a heart emoji. That's all it was, but it brought me back. Some friends dropped off soup, signed cards, baked cookies, mailed books, offered wine, or dropped in and played a game of Scrabble. Many of our church communities signed cards and offered prayers. One friend surprised me when he came over to our house with tools and propped up the couch in our living room a couple of feet so it was easier to sit on. The 2x4 wooden base of the couch became a signing wall, and anyone who happened to come and see me got to sign the wall. It is now a colorful reminder of messages of encouragement. It was signed by well-wishers and cheerleaders who stopped by, a testament of the importance of connection. During this time, my mother flew from Toronto to be with me. We laughed that she was 91 and in better shape than me. She came to walk me around the block. Now picture this if you could. My mother in her spandex and me with my walker. Not quite, but it's just about. We played Scrabble and her presence was a gift. One morning she said, "Getting old is for the birds, I don't recommend it." Her quiet confidence lifted me. All these acts gave me strength in the middle of the night when I lay and recounted my day, as we all do. People reaching out made me feel loved and not alone. The compassion of others matters. The compassion of others helps us to heal in our grief, depression, addiction, withdrawal, and our suffering of any kind. Everyone experiences struggle and sorrow in life, and we need each other to be reminded that we aren't alone on the journey. Our efforts to reach out matter. I have a new compassion for people who live with addictions and chronic pain. I have deepened my understanding of how important connection is in life. And I have noticed I'm more patient with strangers, more engaged with store clerks, and I'm more attentive to those on crutches or obvious discomfort. And I wait to hear people say how they really are. How they really are. How are you, really? Truly listening matters. My journey with oxycodone is over. I haven't had a pill since mid-December. The roller coaster year. I can see the light breaking in and beckoning me forward. I can see clearly now, the song says. I affirm that true healing comes when we realize we're not alone. So if you, friends, know anyone who could use the encouragement of an angel, start flapping your wings. Maybe you can remind them they matter in a text or a phone call. It only takes a second, and you have no idea how it's received. Our kindness and compassion is the balm that heals us when life hurts. Reaching out to one another matters beyond our wildest imaginations. That's what I wrote. So what did I learn? I learned that getting your own socks on in the morning is a heroic event. I learned that touching your toes should be an Olympic sport. Ice machines are a miracle. Hot bath is a taste of heaven. I've learned we got to listen to our body. I've learned that it doesn't matter whether you wear a suit or push a cart in the street. People are people. People are people. I learned that I had an excellent doctor who was wise and compassionate. I learned a better understanding of people who live with chronic pain and addiction and what that's like. But most of all, I learned that reaching out to one another matters. Life's hard. It's hard. Even this morning at Starbucks, I met up with my friend who I haven't seen for 7 months and sat down, and he said, "What are you talking about this morning?" He doesn't come here. I told him, and he told me of 2 people he knew personally in this very same story. Connection matters. Now, as I was thinking about this text and what I've written on Sunday morning, and I got to think about the Bible, I thought, now what am I going to talk about and what biblical passage matters? I have a mentor in the U.S. who is the United Church minister at a very prestigious church in Toronto. He's 80. And I'd sent him what I was going to say, and I'm trying to think about texts from the Bible. He said, "Well, John, I'm 80, and I used to come home at the end of the day and read the Bible. Now I come home and just have a vodka." I thought, some days, I understand that. We had that conversation. And then I said to him, I'm thinking about Matthew's gospel. I said, I'm thinking about how we've complicated religion. We've weighed it way too hard with too much dogma, too much doctrine. And Jesus simply says, I was naked and you clothed me. I was hungry and you fed me. I was lonely and you visited me. I was in prison and you visited me. And they said, well, when did we see you that way? He says, when you did it to the least of these, you did it unto me. Simple acts of clothing, feeding, visiting matter. I wonder if we made religion way too flippin' complicated. Feed, clothe, visitor. That's it. Love one another. That's it. I wonder. Amen.